How many remember when this young man first presented to this organization?
Not me.
You don't remember?
No.
John first presented to this group 10 years ago on February 16, 2011, on the history of Appleton churches, 1850s to 1890s. So this is John's second presentation. Most of you probably know John T. McFadden is an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ who served in the parish ministry for 34 years. He started when he was 5, including 23 years as senior pastor at First Congregational UCC in Appleton. After leaving parish ministry, he served for 5 years as chaplain for Goodwill Industries of north central Wisconsin. John and his lovely wife Susan, who's here, Dr. Susan McFadden, are co-authors of Aging Together, Dementia, Friendship, and Flourishing Communities, published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2011. Susan and John helped to create the Fox Valley Memory Project, a comprehensive dementia-friendly community initiative. They have given many talks in Wisconsin, other parts of the United States, and internationally, including the International Conference on Palliative Care, National Church Residences, Meeting of the Minds, and Alzheimer's Europe. In 2000, he published The Open Door. As some of you have seen, we have a copy in the map room at the museum. It was a history of the First Congregational Church, 1850 to 2000, which led him to research the early religious history of Appleton. He says he is now attempting to be really, truly retired and practice the ukulele daily. How's that going, John? All right. Folks, John McFadden.
So I was pastor, and the church was coming up on its sesquicentennial, 150th anniversary. So over the course of 2 years, I had a sabbatical, some other accrued time, to begin to, I thought it was kind of my job if anybody was going to do it. And we had just the fall of 2007, had acquired a very rundown little cabin in the UP, and I spent a sabbatical summer back and forth. My history committee at the church would fill cardboard cartons with archival material from different eras. I would haul them up to this rundown place, write in the morning, repair the place in the afternoon, review in the evening. It was just a glorious time, and managed to finish it in time for the year 2000. But I had no interest in writing that most tedious of all books, the local church congregation's history. The State Historical Society was kind enough to honor this book with an award, and I had to go to receive it. And the gentleman who had read and reviewed and recommended it, he does a lot of that for the State Historical Society, and he says, when this came into my desk, I said, "Oh, sweet Jesus, not another," and he used a bad word, "local church history that will tell me the name of the foundry where the bell was cast and how much the bell weighed." I'm delighted to say that this is not such a book. My interest was in the ideas, the currents that were shaping our broader society and this emerging region, and how the church I served was shaped by those currents and what role it played in shaping those currents. Above all, I thought it was really the story of Yankee Puritanism finding a foothold in the Wisconsin territory. And I originally wanted to call the book Yankees in the Fox River Valley, because I really thought that was the heart of the story. History committee said, no, we're the Church of the Open Door. We're going to title your book. But I need to introduce you, and in most cases reintroduce you, to that originating cast of characters. How many of you are familiar, a lesser of the three gentlemen I'm going to talk about, but he had a pivotal role in his own weird way. How many of you know the story of Eleazar Williams? Not that many, so it's worth telling. Because I never managed to find a picture of him. But yeah, I will do some reading. I hate to do that, but let me just start with the very introduction here. The great influx of Yankees, settlers from New York and New England into Wisconsin began in the late 1830s, 10 years before statehood. Some came as farmers or homesteaders. Many came as entrepreneurs and land speculators. We're going to talk about a mixture of idealism and capitalist greed, both in pretty much equal measures shaping early Wisconsin. And I won't go into all this stuff here. Let me tell you about Eleazar Williams. He was as colorful and complex a character as 19th century America produced. No two histories are in full agreement on the particulars of his remarkable life. Here's what we do know. He was born in 1789, son of a Native American father and a European mother, raised by relatives in Massachusetts, and pursued a checkered career as soldier, linguist, negotiator, missionary, and con artist. He served as a scout and a spy during the French and Indian War. Which side he served at a given time is open to debate. During that era, he established relations with many tribal groups, mastered a number of Native American languages. At the war's conclusion, he served the Episcopal Church as a missionary among the tribes of New York State, ultimately convincing portions of the Oneida and Stockbridge tribes to relocate to eastern Wisconsin. Williams married Madeleine Jourdain, a woman of French and Menominee heritage, and settled for a time upon 5,000 acres along the Fox River in present-day De Pere. Some say that the feds gave him that land in thanks for his service in moving the tribes. Others say it was a family inheritance from his wife. We don't know. Anyway, Williams was never long content without a grand scheme to pursue. He dreamed of a great federation of Native American tribes that would have a substantial common voice in negotiating with federal authorities. Not surprisingly, he pictured himself as leader of this federation. He could play up his Native American blood when it suited. But he managed to alienate, it was a gift he had, both the Oneidas, once his principal supporter in the Episcopal Church. He was in debt and adrift. That condition would pretty much describe the rest of his life. And he was soon to deny his earlier claim of Native American heritage and insist that he was, ladies and gentlemen, the lost dauphin, or crown prince of France, and the legitimate heir to the French throne. There were a number of lost dolphins roaming around the country at the time. You know the story that during the Revolution that the real prince was smuggled away and a peasant boy was killed in his place. A convincing article in an influential publication argued that Williams was indeed that prince, raised in Canada by Native Americans. It was later revealed that the author of this article was Eleazar Williams. So broke, and with the grandiose schemes for his empire, he drifted east seeking funding for his grand enterprise. And your local history buffs, guess whose office he wound up in Boston? Yes, Amos Andrew Lawrence. And of course, he used the 5,000 acres in De Pere as collateral, never repaid Lawrence. Lawrence ended up with 5,000 acres in present-day De Pere. And if you've ever driven up there, you know that the road that goes through much of that acreage is called Lost Dolphin Drive. And that's the story there. So now he's out of the story. But that's how Amos Andrew Lawrence wound up with acreage in Wisconsin. So you're good with this so far, right?
Yeah.
Let us talk about Mr. Lawrence, who I called the consummate Yankee. Born into wealth and privilege, most of you know a lot of this, son of a successful merchant philanthropist, the same pursuits to which he devoted his life. From an early age, he was steeped in the Yankee Puritan values of the day. Diligence, virtue, self-discipline, honesty, temperance. Temperance will be a big part of our story tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And the enthusiastic pursuit of personal wealth. During his senior year at Harvard, he wrote an essay on his future goals. To be rich would be my delight. I considered it an oyster-like dullness and not a pious or enlightened way of thinking that makes some despise riches. If anyone has love for his fellow creatures and love of the worthy respect of his neighborhood, he will be willing and glad to be rich. That sacrifice he was willing to make for us. He was a man of deep religious convictions, expressed through observing the rigors of moral discipline in his personal life and by his philanthropic work. He had a routine, a lot of these Yankees did, up early, exercising before an open window. Fresh air was a virtue. At 7, breakfast with the family, then morning devotions in the chapel. And he would ride horseback to his office in downtown Boston, and he worked every day, 6 entire hours, tending to his textile business, 3 hours, and hearing requests for philanthropic aid, 3 hours. After dinner, we won't go into his routines. He was raised a Unitarian, but he converted to the Episcopal faith at the time of his marriage to Sarah Elizabeth Appleton, right? And the cause of higher education in a Christian setting became the principal focus of his philanthropy. And now we have to talk about the currents of the times. The form of Puritanism that dominated Yankee religious values was rooted in traditions that dated to the 17th century Puritans: hard work, discipline, personal moral contact, etc., etc. The accrual of personal wealth was encouraged, but with it came responsibility. The early years of the 19th century had produced a weakening of the moral climate of America and a range of social ills growing from and this will again figure in the Appleton story, a per capita consumption of alcohol more than 3 times the current level that we worry about. Indeed, if you get into the early 20th century, the ratio of taverns to residents in Appleton was something like 7 times higher. You think there's a lot of bars on College Avenue? No! We don't have nearly enough, ladies and gentlemen. So we might get into that some today. But I quoted an 1839 piece here. I am sure that Americans can fix nothing without a drink. If you meet, you drink. If you part, you drink. If you make acquaintance, you drink. They drink because it is hot, they drink because it is cold. If successful in elections, they drink and rejoice. If not, they drink and swear. They begin to drink early in the morning, they leave off late at night. They commence it early in life, they continue until they drop down in the grave. Puritans didn't care for this particular dynamic. So out of these concerns, the churches in America gave birth to, and we won't go into the history of the whole Great Awakening, but this was called the Second Awakening, a revival movement that called for a conversion, but different than we would probably think of conversion and tent meetings and hallelujah, come to Jesus and it's the Lord and Savior. This was less about what you believed than how you behaved. Okay, that's just a really different perspective that I think some folks have trouble comprehending. And the movement was primarily directed to the rough and tumble settlements of the frontier, where the various denominations established mission agencies. They had the camp meetings, they had all that, but in that era, to be a member of a Christian church meant to live in this life of virtue, refraining from the use of strong spirits, strong language, gambling in any form, moderation, decency, all these kind of virtuous life things. But at the same time that this second awakening was happening, we were experiencing what often gets called the Second Enlightenment. If you remember the European Great Enlightenment, this was a very optimistic philosophical thread around the perfectibility of human beings. So you're all depraved, you got to come to the camp meeting, change your life, but we are moving towards moral perfection. And these are kind of rolling into each other. Fascinating stuff. A profoundly optimistic view of a new humanity, liberated from the constraints of class oppression. The spirit of the new age of reason would end superstition, a golden era, etc., etc. Nice ideas here. And one of the expressions of this, as the denominations, particularly what we think of now as the Reformed or Puritan traditions or semi-Reformed, coming out of New England, Massachusetts, and New York State, included the Congregationalists, the Presbyterians, and the Methodists, all kind of spearheading this, and really wanting to work cooperatively. They did not believe that competition between denominations was healthy because we all have the same broad goals. Doctrine was not important in that era. They weren't splitting hairs over your specific beliefs about the nature of Christ or anything like that. It's like we've got to build a better and more moral society. So among the ways this really affected directly First Congregational is that the Congregationalists had the resources. They had a lot more money than the Presbyterians and more personnel. But Congregationalism was radically decentralized. Each local church was independent, while the Presbyterians had more of a structure of oversight. Okay, I don't want to go into that too deeply. So most of the churches they founded jointly with Congregationalist money were founded as Presbyterian churches. And as one Congregational historian put it, it became the chief privilege of 19th century Congregationalism to prosper the founding of Presbyterian churches. And we look back and said, whoops, maybe we didn't think that through so well. And many churches were founded jointly as Congregational/Presbyterian. And while I won't go into this story, even though First Congregational was founded under that name in 1850, it was first formed as a Presbyterian church. Okay, it converted to a Congregational affiliation a year later. And there are still a few churches around Wisconsin that are Congregational/Presbyterian. And very few people now recall why that was the case. So, I love this. So we're going to get to this character, Reader Smith, in a moment. The denominational about founding colleges as well, following the early Puritan tradition of employing education as a means of transforming persons who would in turn transform the wider society. Christian colleges were literally described as fortresses standing against the tide of satanic powers, indoctrinating young men into the sober, upright, and progressive values of the awakening and the Enlightenment. The Reverend Reader Smith, whose story we'll hear in a minute, argued that a college was needed in Wisconsin because the hosts of Satan are marching upon us in three distinct divisions: the papist, the rational, and the sensual. And I talked about this marvelous non-competitive spirit among the Protestants. They did not extend that to the Roman Catholics, you know, right? Who are forces of Satan. And that again will figure in our story in several ways. So Lawrence, steeped in the awakening, the Enlightenment, he was not fully committed to abolitionism, but he was committed that no new states would emerge as slave states. So he pumped a lot of money into what territory that became a state? Kansas. I believe they named a city there after him. So a lot of Amos Andrew Lawrence's money went into Lawrence, Kansas, and of course a successful effort there. Deeply committed to the higher education, viewing the Christian college as a setting where young men would learn virtues, sobriety, discipline, blah, blah, blah. So he looked at his holdings of 5,000 acres in Wisconsin as a place to build this vision. However, this is where it gets tangled. If you're going to, if you want to get wealthy and do good in the world, founding a college is a great idea for doing good in the world. How's that going to make you wealthy? Well, you own enough land around where the college will be to have the value of that land double, triple, quadruple as development comes to that area. So he's going to do that in what is now De Pere. So he donated $10,000 and a hunk of this land to the Methodists. Methodists had an organization in this area centered in Fond du Lac. And even though he was an Episcopalian, he wrote in one letter, "I regard my Episcopal faith as somewhat too refined for Wisconsin." And he thought that the Methodists were a little bit too enthusiastic, a little too blah, 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 but darn it, they got stuff done. So he gave some land and money to the Methodists. And he got frustrated because the Methodists gladly accepted it and didn't make it their highest priority, as Lawrence wanted them to. So here comes Reeder Smith, Methodist clergyman. He was a fundraiser for a college seminary in Michigan, and he called upon Lawrence basically to beg money for the college. Lawrence turned him down, but he says, "You're my man. I want you to come to work for me and be my agent in Wisconsin and convince your brothers in the Methodist Church to get their rear ends moving on this." So he sent Reeder Smith to scout out the land and all. Now here, I have disagreements with people I love and cherish. The legend, the story, as we've recorded in the Appleton Library staff book, is that Reeder and his party, which included his wife, Eliza Kimball Smith, crossed Lake Michigan on the ice to come and scout it. And dear Bonnie Buchanan, who wrote that wonderful book on the Wednesday Club, accepted that as gospel. And I've always been pretty darn skeptical. There haven't been many winters where that would be feasible, much less a wise idea, okay? But who knows, somehow they got here. And they found Lawrence's land unsuitable for a college. And kind of hedged about why, too much of a slope down the river, it's not good. The real problem, ladies and gentlemen, it was too darn close to Green Bay, which was full of Frenchmen and Indians and Catholics, and a freewheeling, drinking kind of town that was going to be a bad influence on the. I'm very serious about this. They wanted to establish a Puritan community, and that ain't going to work in Green Bay in the 18th century. So they kept moving down the river and got to our current site, and it was Eliza Kimball Smith who put down her foot and said, "This is the place." So they had to report back to Amos Andrew Lawrence, who was not at all happy with this report. But he allowed himself to become convinced and dispatched Reeder Smith to acquire land in the Fox Valley, enough for a college, and by the way, a lot more land to make money for Amos Lawrence when the college was built. And the two biggest landowners in the region at the time had names not unfamiliar to us: Meade, Law, okay? And so Lawrence convinced them to, located the plot maps and all, so they could donate land for the college, because they knew they'd make money too, and located where the college would be, where Amos Andrew Lawrence land and Meade and Law all kind of intersected. In the course of all the paperwork, some of the Meade and the Law land ended up in the title of Amos Andrew Lawrence and Reader Smith. They were all land speculators, and they were all getting filthy rich, really, really rich. So that's what I'm talking about, this mix of genuine idealism and acquisitiveness and greed. Capitalism and religion, if you want to call it, have been sleeping in the same bed through most eras of history, okay? Are you good with this so far? I'm trying to think. We're okay for a while, aren't we? Yeah. I would love to get into some later just fun things. I'm not here tonight to talk specifically about churches or congregations. I'm happy to do that if anybody wants to hear. The first two churches founded were First Congregational, but okay, what church was founded, incorporated before First Congregational? First Methodist, yeah. But Congregationalists built their building first, so what do you want for bragging rights? But they were so intertwined that the first Sunday school was put together by the Congregationalists for the Methodists. I mean, they were really interwoven for a period of time, I think in a really good way. So I'm going to skip the Great Appleton Land Rush. I think you have the idea there. Any questions out of what I've done so far? Because I'm going to kind of jump into the 1850s. By the way, since we're doing a little thing on churches, the first Roman Catholic church to be founded in Appleton was? St. There. We know our Roman Catholic history better. I've always loved the story of, it was primarily, in its earliest days, the Irish laborers who came to dig the canals and such, who founded the base of the membership of St. Mary's, which meant it was by definition a mission church, right? Because they didn't have any money. By the way, that really screwed up the Temperance village idea, which I'll talk about in a minute. The Irish came and said, we'll drink to that. And what's an Irishman going to call his church? But St. Mary's, right? Then we had German Catholics begin to move in as farmers and merchants and such. And they were, they did better. Financially, they prospered. And the diocese up in Green Bay is saying, thank God, we've got enough Catholics down in the Appleton area that they'll have a church that can support itself, somehow naively believing that Germans were going to put up with Irishmen, right? Just, because, the Puritans, what were called for some time the English Protestant churches. English in the sense that they did their services in the English language. So, first English Lutheran was named not because there were a lot of British members, but because they were the first Lutheran church to hold Sunday services in the English language. So the Protestants, they were not very happy with the Irish. They wanted their canals dug because then they get more money, but they were morally lax, et cetera, heavy drinkers. They didn't know what to quite make of the Germans, because the Germans liked their beer, but they also worked hard and were disciplined. So now the Germans are joining St. Mary's. And you all know the story of the Germans, by prearranged signal, that they had secretly bought a plot of land and put shovels on it. And during the Mass, on a signal, the Germans got up and walked out and walked to the site where they would build their own Catholic parish and dug their first shovels full. And if an Irishman is going to call his church St. Mary's, what's a good German man going to call his church? St. Joseph! St. Joseph! And the diocese was so upset because now they had 2 mission churches to support. But those are not the stories I'm here to tell tonight. So, you see when I said I didn't have a prepared script? You're getting all this down?
Yeah,
Every bit of it. Good. Because I'm going to go other directions. Okay. So a little bit about Appleton in the 1950s. The Yankee Puritan thing was anything that's been done elsewhere, we will do a little bit better. And the things we bragged about, that we could get more wheat, flour out of X amount of grain than any other mill, because we know how to build things right. And farmers will come for, there's a lot of that in the book. And the rapid growth, blacksmith shops, et cetera, I won't take time for that. But here I am from, what year would this be? We're right around, I think, 1852. What is the distinct trait of the people of Appleton? The answer is temperance, strict sobriety. Officers do not license rum selling. Any is sold is a violation of the law and public sentiment. When men sell liquor, we fine them. When they get drunk, we imprison them. Everything's prospering like crazy. The citizens boasted that Appleton possessed unusual social advantages. Composed mostly of people from central and New England states, men and women who had grown up in communities with excellent schools and churches, accordingly cultured and fit in every way for the higher and better duties of life. It was declared that Appleton was noted for its morality, sobriety, culture, and politeness. And I like the name they took for themselves, among others, was Wisconsin's Puritan Village. That was the identity they wanted to forge, just this ideal, Yankee Puritan ideal. Do everything a little bit better. Okay. Dry village. But the arrival of other ethnic traditions, notably Irish and Germans, diluted the consensus. The dry law lasted only 5 years. In June 1856, the liquor ordinance in the village was repealed by the board because it was universally treated as a dead letter. Thus, a great change had taken place. The old guard were still faithful to prohibition, but the new arrivals demanded their beer and liquor. So, we're getting this division coming that would find political expression and journalistic expression. Back then, we talk about the limitations of the press today. There was no pretension of nonpartisan journalism in the 19th century, believe me, nothing like it at all. And this particular arose around the issue of slavery. So progressive Christians, almost universally advocates of abolition, the Republicans, if you will, Enlightenment heritage, et cetera, in that era, newspapers did not pretend to political neutrality, nor value restraint. The Appleton Crescent was decidedly democratic. Here's an editorial from 1857. People of Wisconsin, 1 week from next Tuesday, you will be called upon to determine whether Negro equality, nullification, and corruption shall rule our young and vigorous state. We appeal to you as you love your own race, or you cherish the Union. This is going to get worse, much worse. That we are, this is the Democratic Party. We are unalterably opposed to the extension of the right of suffrage to the Negro race, and will never consent that the odious doctrine of Negro equality shall find a place upon the books. And here's the Crescent again. And they've stopped using the word Republican without preceding it with the word black. That the black Republicans wish to place the black race on terms of social equality with the white race is disgusting and repulsive. It is the aim of the black Republicans, in effect, to effect an indiscriminate intercourse of the races and their final amalgamation, therefore tending to produce an intolerable, enervated, and dwarfed mixed race. Yes, interracial marriage creates dwarfs. We did not know that. But I mean, this is gloves off stuff, right? So we get into the Civil War. When the war was declared, the Crescent initially sputtered that a war to fled Wisconsin with a race of beings who will all be obligated to treat as inferiors, no matter what laws may be passed. But with the taking of Fort Sumter, the parties closed ranks behind the Union. The tones changed significantly. I won't go into the Civil War history. I'm sure you've had presenters do it, will again. But again, if you want to talk about churches a minute, a shout out to, this is again at St. Mary's. At the close of a stirring appeal on behalf of the Union, Reverend Lewis Dale of the Catholic Church gave notice the American flag would hang over the church, and they have an outdoor spare, and he's giving this speech, testimonial to the patriotism of the Catholics. And like them, yeah, to fly their flag. Like them, we are ready to bleed in its defense. Never during the whole war of the Revolution did we hear of a Catholic coward or a Catholic traitor. Neither shall it be now. When the Protestant General Gates fled from the battlefield of Camden with the Protestant militia of North Carolina and Virginia, who but the Catholics stood firm at their posts and fought and died with their brave old Catholic hero DeKalb. And then he thanked the Protestants who had attended the ceremony. So, I mean, it really is sometimes disturbing and sometimes really fun, all the recruiting. How am I doing? I really want to stick to, I can take another 15 minutes or so, can I? I want to talk about several movements that I just found fascinating. I want to talk about, we're jumping ahead, I'm skipping around. If you want to hear more about anything, I can keep going. I want to talk about the Rustification movement. Anybody know that term at all? Yeah, some of you do. Okay, good. Again, this was a New England, New York thing initially. And in terms of, let me see if I can find the right paragraph here. This had to do with the kind of popular imagination, where is the safe place to be and where is the dangerous place to be? And through the early era of America, the city, the town, the village, put the stockade around it, that was a safe place to be. Out in the woods in the darkness lurked danger. Native Americans certainly, and wolves and things, but also demons and devils and such, right? Superstition. The devil in Daniel Webster, it was always when walking through the woods alone at night, that suddenly the devil would be at the crossroads, and you had to get back to the safety of the village, get through the gate. And then the 19th century, that changed with industrialization. The cities became the place of danger. Smoke, fumes, fires, etc., and nature was pristine and beautiful. And now God was no longer in the village or the city, but out in the country. By the way, that reminds me of something, because everything reminds me of something. Another thing about Democrats and Republicans, progressives and such, all the affluent progressives, hang on that word progressive, it didn't mean quite what it means today, right? We're not talking about wokeness. We're talking about people who were privileged and wanted to get more privileged. They wanted to help the poor at a distance, and God knows my church was guilty of that. The ladies of the church wanted to reach out to the bloody Fourth Ward, where all the workers and their poor little children, and they thought the church could civilize these children. But the children couldn't come to church without proper church clothing to wear. So these fastidious, privileged women were making dress-up clothes for the poor children. You know, not really doing anything to alleviate their poverty or their conditions, but here's a nice suit, you can wear it and come to our church, and you'll look clean and fresh. So, I mean, the social movements of that era, particularly around we might get into wars with the Tavern League and the saloons and such, because No, I'm not going to talk about that now. I certainly could. Where was I going with it? Oh, that in many local elections, the Democrats and Republicans would choose a name for that contest for their party. Not Republican or Democrat, but they would make one up for that year. So the Republicans opposed adding more water cisterns to the city to hold water for the firefighters, because it was sometimes to their great advantage to have their mill burned down, collect the insurance money, and rebuild. The Democrats, more associated with low-income people, were arguing for the cisterns to save the houses of low-income and modest-income people. And the Democrats one year titled their party the Anti-Progress Party, which would not a really name that would fly today, but they understood that progress was defined as unequally benefiting the wealthy. So one of the, and we'll get to this with the Russification movement. So now the clean air, the freshness, let's get out in God's country and out of this filthy city. And idealized view of nature. It's the time of the romantic poets and artists and such, right? The mountains of New York or New England, Canada represent the idealized view of nature. And the great era of the New England summer camps. And some of these camps were mansions, but mansions made with logs, and they do these summers in the Adirondacks or White Mountains and bring in artists and guest lecturers and speakers. It was an ideal summer of privilege for those who could do it, right? But for the wealthy, while persons of more modest means contented themselves with picnics and outings closer to home. In the rustification camps of the late 19th century, we find the roots of such disparate later developments as summer church camp for children. Take these poor inner city kids and take them to someplace quiet and calm like Wisconsin Dells. And it was then, if any of you have seen the old part of the Dells, and which still markets itself heavily to low-income African-American families in Chicago. Not the shiny gee whiz roller coaster stuff, but what a summer resort used to be like. It also gave rise to church camps and the rise of country clubs as social and recreational outlets. So the founding of Riverview ties in directly to this rustification. If you couldn't get all the way down to Lake Winnebago, you could go to this amazing, it wasn't quite a country club, it was a city club, preserving a little bit of country in the city, which is a real part of this whole movement. So the Congregationalists built a summer colony on the north shore of Lake Winnebago. First it was tents, and then it became ever and ever more elaborate places with a very fun, structured rhythm of the days. Of course, it was founded by the Congregationalists, so it was strict temperance at Lockhurst, as it was called. A few years later, some non-Congregationalists built a summer colony not too far along the lake that did not have a temperance edict. And they had much better parties, and the Congregationalists went to them, but they did it kind of very, very quietly. So we got, and a lot of the industrialists would, some who could, they couldn't telecommute from Lockhurst, so some of them, did like 3-day weekends there and then came back to town, and others were actually commuting daily. So one of the progress platforms was to make the road all the way down to Winnebago a plank road for their carriages, right? And folks of lower income said, we don't have no stinking carriage. We don't need a plank road to Lake Winnebago. We don't need to be paying for that. So you're seeing like the socioeconomic dimensions of these divides, and the churches are getting pulled into this and painting it with this glossy glow of idealism. Sometimes genuine, but many years later, critical reflection says, well, they were caring for their own interests, as human beings are wont to do. So another thing that we were emulating here out of what was happening with Yankee Puritans in New York and New England. The privileged get away for the summer. We're going to our summer place, right? And meanwhile, the folks of poverty and such are just living in, I mean, the flats in that era were not a very pretty place, and the air above them was not a pretty place. And the industrialists and mill managers and such would come down from the north side of the river, and the workers would come from the south side, the Bloody Fourth Ward, appropriately named. And it was said that no mill workers worked 6 days a week, long days. They got paid with a check on Saturday. There was no way to walk home without passing one or more taverns. And the taverns would cash their checks on Saturday and attempt to keep them there all weekend. Moreover, children could go to work in the mills at the age of 14, and their money was as good as anybody else's in the tavern. And so, I mean, this is why the temperance wars became so heated and so much money was involved. The state of Wisconsin carried statutes in its books that prohibited the sale of alcoholic beverages on Sunday and likewise forbade sales to minors. The city had similar ordinances, but routinely violated. The council turned a blind eye. But worked 6 days a week. I've covered that. Battle lines were firmly drawn, and it was the saloons that had deeper pockets. You know, the state liquor lobby is still very, very strong, not as strong as it was back then. Basically, the city council was in the back pocket of the Tavern League. And many of the saloons, at least some of them, had mattresses in the back. So when a worker passed out drunk, they'd throw him in a mattress till he sobered up enough to come back and start drinking again. You know, the social justice issue, trying to get the paycheck home to the spouse and the children. And so, I mean, we're talking about huge moral ugliness in the part of this, and they would just keep buying off our city council. So it took many, many years to resolve that, if you consider it resolved today. But it just, if it comforts anybody to say, it really was a lot worse. It was a lot worse. Okay. So the final thing, just for fun, I want to talk about some of the interesting kind of fad currents that move through the churches and community. There was a movement late in the 19th and the early 20th century called muscular Christianity. And this was an effort to address the absence of men from churches. And the men, they had reasons not to be there. One, and I'm not going into structures of churches, but at First Congregational we had two separate organizations, the church and the society. It was fairly easy to join the church. It was hard to join the society because you had to make a significant commitment financially and sign the Temperance edict. And if someone who was a member of the society was ever observed going into a saloon or drinking a glass of sherry in the front window of their parlor, they were kicked out of the church, or the society, if you will. So, you know, really, men would say thanks, but no thanks. I will come to church on Mother's Day, like other men do, you know, but I'm not going to commit to it because the image of Christian men, and particularly of the clergy, was of effete, tea-drinking, lace-doily kind of stuff. So this movement called muscular Christianity was to show that you could be a Christian minister and a real man. So we had one minister, a guy named Rouse, who, to demonstrate this, put a punching bag in the front porch at the parsonage and would pound on it, because in one issue of the Open Door, the church newsletter, it says, if the boy who stole the minister's punch bag returns it promptly, the minister promises to do his practicing on the punching bag and not the boy. Kind of fast, these little things that rolled through. But he was also friends with a character named George McNutt, a 19th century, or early 20th century nutritionist who would come and give series of lectures. And lectures were big public entertainment. That'd be another whole presentation, if you will. But he would talk about healthy eating and give recipes for like breakfast oat cakes, and then kind of undercut the whole thing by saying, serve with lots and lots of butter. But he brought to town something called the smokeless cooker. And a few must still exist in the community. It's something that really should be in the society's collection if you can find one, and you got tons of money. But the smokeless cooker, it was the Instapot of its era. It was a wooden crate on casters with a lid on it, and it was lined with something to insulate, most commonly that healthiest of all insulators, asbestos. And would be a space in there for 2 pots. And the idea was that you would get dinner going and pots in the stove, stick the pots in the smokeless oven, roll it under a table, and then just let it simmer for hours and hours. And quite a fad for about 10 years. There was a shop downtown that sold them. You had plans to make your own, and its virtues included preserving the nutrients and all. But he wrote somewhere, this has spared many a housewife from nervous breakdowns caused by watching pots boil over. And churches are pushing these agendas. The same minister led a crusade against trees. I'm not going to try and find this paragraph, but it said, when we first planted trees in our neighborhoods, they were lovely and refreshing and gave us greenery. Now they have grown much too large, and in the dampness beneath grow all kinds of molds and cancers. For the sake of your children, cut down your trees. Not an early environmentalist as we understand that today. So I'm just dabbling around and having fun, but just wanting you to have this broad sense of the currents in the culture that were shaping our lives and how the churches shaped and were shaped by them.